All right, so welcome to the first of a series of presentations that we're doing from the School of Education and Technology, just called SETS Presents. So we're going to have these presentations about every 2 months, and faculty members are going to present something that they've been working on, either research or some other project that they've been doing, and this is the first one. So we're starting off with a collaborative piece with Teresa Bell from the Writing Center. Hello. Welcome, and welcome to all the folks online. I think you can see us. I can't see you yet, but we will hopefully rectify that at some point. Please join in around a table. No, I think we're good. All right. So if everybody's comfortable, we will begin. So what we're doing today, I'm first going to point your attention to the slide that's up, because we have a Padlet that we are going to be using for the folks online. If people in the room want to use that as well as their method of getting things down, that's great. But we are encouraging the use of the Padlet. The link, I think, has been placed into the online, so the folks online can just click on the link and go. If you want a second or two to start that up, we can hold off, but we will be revisiting this when we get to the activity. So I will start with the presentation now, and we'll see where it goes. So welcome to Greenlighting Feedback, Improving Effectiveness and Efficiency of Feedback on Student Writing. And it's something Teresa has been working on. I've been working with Teresa a little bit on this project that we've been doing. We've done a presentation or two here and there, and we just thought we'd share it with everybody so you can see where we're at with these things. So my name's Jo Axe. I'm the director for the School of Education and Technology. I've been working at RIU since 2000, a variety of different roles, starting as an associate faculty member. And I worked in faculty management, faculty of social and applied sciences, and I'm now a resident in School of Education and Technology. So I'm going to hand it to Teresa to introduce herself.
I'm Teresa Bell. I'm the manager of the Writing Center. I've been at Royal Roads for almost 15 years. I'm being given the hook to come over here. Hello. I've been in the Writing Center for the last 10, almost 11 years, and before that I was in the Center for Teaching and Educational Technologies and originally the Center for Teaching and Learning. So I've been in a few different places as well, but for the last 10 years anyway, my focus has been on the Writing Center.
Great.
So it's lovely to see you all. I will give it back to Jo.
Thank you very much. And before further ado, just to do the acknowledgement for the traditional territories of the Kosapsan and Lekwungen nations. If you're not aware of this slide is actually available to anybody that used it at RIU to do the presentations. And it's a really encouraged to start your presentations off with that. So you can access that. I'm not sure how. Do you know, Sam? The Brand Central. So if you need to have this for any of your presentations, and we adapt it as we're going through different places and locations. So just to encourage the use of that particular slide. So what we're going to do today, there are some activities that will require input and conversations. And the folks online, as I mentioned, have the Padlet. If you want to use the Padlet in the room, that's great too. If you want to get together with the folks around the table, you can. There's flip charts as well for people that might want to use the flip charts. We're going to talk about the goals and outcomes that we're proposing for this session. There's 3 activities as we're going through, and they build on each other. We're talking about the literature that's sort of helped us move along with this topic that we've been working on, and then the traffic light piece, which is start, proceed with caution, and proceed ahead. And we'll talk about how that works when you're giving feedback to students. The greenlighting feedback piece, what it looks like when you give green light feedback to students, what the impact that might have on your own work and on the students' feelings of getting the feedback. We'll look at how you strive for that green light feedback and why, and then we'll provide examples. So we'll start talking about it, and you'll be working on some of those things as well yourself, having those discussions. And then we'll just look at some of the resources that are available through the Writing Center and hopefully through the Padlet as well, because we've been working with things on that. And any questions, if you want to ask questions as we're going, please do so. Otherwise, you can save them till the end. Session goal. All right. So what we're trying to accomplish with this one is give you some examples of that green light feedback and that you can actually apply in your own work. So it's sort of a reflective practice on how you're working with students and your marking and the feedback you're giving and how that might impact what they're responding to and how they're feeling about it, but how you can change those processes you use. And the specific outcomes are just to really appreciate the impact your feedback has on student writing, to have some reflective thoughts about maybe feedback you've had yourself, maybe feedback that you've given, that you've had those conversations with students on, and then more reflect on those challenges that are associated with this red and yellow, and we'll explain which the red, yellow, and green feedback are, and then key considerations for providing feedback, and when it might be appropriate, when it might not be appropriate too. We have a little conversation around that. And I think it's Teresa.
Yep. Okay, so first activity, which is where you get to start doing things, is we would like to invite you to think about what qualities do you think are important in giving written feedback, particularly in this area of building confidence and empowering development. Right? So if you'd like to do a little brainstorming at your tables, if you want to work with a Padlet, you certainly can. The online folks, if you'd like to take advantage of that, that would be great. For those of you in the room, the flip chart stands all have paper and pens at them, so if that's something that you would like to work with, you're welcome to do that as well. And we'll give you about 5 minutes for that. We'll kind of check in and see how you're doing, and then we'll have a chance to talk about what you come up with.
So, how did we do? I have a microphone, so you can prove that you were thinking. Who would like the microphone first? So what was your answer to this question? What qualities do you think are important in written feedback to build confidence and empowerment? And the microphone's got a little button at the bottom. No. There, yeah.
Anyone?
Don't overwhelm the student.
That's a good point.
Good. Don't overwhelm the student.
Yep. Would you like to expand on that at all?
With writing, what I practice is that I provide feedback on the writing on the first page, and then I focus on content and other aspects for the rest. So just that it's not overwhelming. And I let the students know it might not be the first page, it could be the second or the third, but it's one page only. And I found that's helped.
That's great.
Great.
Good strategy.
Thank you.
And so that builds them their confidence, empowers the development, it allows them to continue and work forward, and it also gives them an opportunity to look at their writing differently as they're going forward in the assignment, and you can turn it over to them. So these are the things that I've been seeing. You can see some more of those things if you continue reading your paper.
I should add that in addition to that, we talked about making sure that the feedback is constructive and specific, so providing an example. You might want to rephrase this, or for clarity, for example, and providing the example. Or if there's an issue with a citation, correct it, or provide a link to correct it. But depending on where you're at with the students, I think depends. But certainly in undergraduate, I would probably correct the citation, for example.
Great.
Which is a good point, because it depends where the students are, not only whether they're in undergrad or graduate, but it depends where they are in the program. So if they're at the beginning of the program, you might be providing more feedback on the writing. As you progress through it, you might be getting more specific and picky as you get to the end of the program, building on things, hopefully, that earlier instructors have already provided feedback on. And it also relates to one of the questions here for us, which I'm saying, Joe, Teresa, is for everybody, this question. So is there a difference between how feedback is delivered for individual and work versus teamwork? So, I mean, from my perspective, yes and no, and it depends. It's one of those really not very helpful answers. I'm good at those. So, I mean, if you're approaching in a similar type of activity, so it's a paper, it's a report, but if it's an activity that's more like a presentation, then you're looking at different dynamics that are involved in providing the feedback on it. The other thing too is there are different ways of giving students the feedback. So I know some people with teamwork that have provided verbal feedback, a recording for the team assignment for the entire team to get. So again, it's a different type of feedback. So I think it really depends on the activity versus whether it's individual and team. And one of the things Teresa mentioned.
Yeah, is also that there's a difference between a team voice and an individual voice, right? And that team papers typically have kind of that combined voice. So if you're giving feedback on a team paper, it isn't going to be specific likely to a particular individual. So in terms of the question of, building confidence and empowering development, you're building confidence and empowering development in the team. But for that specific individual kind of feedback, there may not be those kind of specifics that will apply to each particular individual. So I think that's another difference.
And oftentimes they've been edited, or they'll sometimes get the strongest person who's good with the command of English language to edit it. So again, that individual may not be getting the feedback that they need individually because it's already been done by somebody else or rejigged. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit different, I think, a different situation. So some of the other, I'm just pulling up some of the key things from here. More detail is better if it's feasible. Now this is good because this one that talks about rhyme and class size is, I think, one of the points that comes up in the literature that we'll see in a few minutes, and how that impacts our ability to provide feedback to students. Feedback perceived as addressing the work, not the person. And that's a great point, because if you have a habit of taking things very personally when you're reading things, we all do. Student evaluations, anything, we take them very personally. So when you're looking at that, trying to step back from that picture and address the writing as opposed to that person and you have done something wrong. Feedback explicitly describes how to improve items being assessed. So it's, again, it speaks to what Rebecca was saying earlier. It moves people forward with their feedback and allows them to go somewhere new, to acquire new tools or ways of doing. Timing feedback, yes. And then feedback that's generally should be related to the deliverable. So feeding it back to that deliverable and what you're asking them to do. Actually, that's very helpful. And oftentimes we get reminders from students if we don't do that. So are there any other things or points that you brought up that we haven't? So.
There's a microphone on that.
Oh, you've got the mic. Oops. 1 minute. At the bottom. There you go.
We were just talking about the feed forward, that appreciation piece. Mm-hmm. To be specific, but have a positive reinforcement. What was start with what insights they brought, what was important, what were their discoveries, the appreciation of the work they have put, with some observations that can put that critical thinking of, would you have been able to consider this? Maybe put the links of the actual papers or documents that we would like them to look further into this. But I think everything else, the reflective questions, is important. How can we provoke them to think of that feedback and what was meaningful, linking back to the learning outcome?
Yes. And so moving the students forward as well in the process, allowing them the opportunity to think about what they were doing, reflect on it, and on the feedback that you're providing, so that the next time they deliver an assignment, it will hopefully have incorporated some of the things that you've mentioned. Yeah.
But if I can also jump into about ensuring that, I keep getting waved over here, talking about what was great as well, right? Because I think, I know when I'm giving feedback on student work, I'm so enthusiastically trying to give them information that will help them develop and move forward that sometimes I get sucked into forgetting that I'm also supposed to be telling them what they're doing really well, right? And so because I'm focusing on all of these things that, well, think about this and you could do that. And so keeping that conscious effort in mind of also saying, you did this really well and your APA formatting here is great. And I really appreciate how you provided this explanation and those sorts of things, so that they've got those signposts on both sides of that discussion, which I think reflects the anonymous comment here about starting with the constructive, as well as kind of that formative feedback too of, here's what I think you did really well, and here's some things that you might find helpful to focus on moving forward. So thank you, that was great.
Great. So the next little piece we're going to do is talk about what the literature says, which reflects several of the points that we've already made here, but it includes other things too. So there's two sections to the lit review that we did, and one was about what faculty think about providing feedback, and the other is about what the students think about providing feedback. So we have a little bit of some confirmation of things you've said, but some that extends it a little bit further. So faculty member providing feedback is complex, which I think we all know. There's multiple facets to when you're providing feedback and where you're going with it. It's not only looking back to the rubrics you provide the students, but providing the feedback that's specific to their assignment. that can help them move forward, as you mentioned earlier. But when you're thinking about that, there are these things that really have an impact on how we provide it. So the amount of feedback, we have to consider when is a good time to provide a lot of feedback and when might be a good time to not provide so much feedback. So as you mentioned, Rebecca, earlier on, in assignment, you might be providing more depth and richer feedback. And then I usually say, I do the same thing. The first page or two, I'll make comments about things and I'll say, I'm not going to keep commenting on this specific thing going forward. So it doesn't mean it's not there, it just means I'm not going to spend time repeating that comment. And how useful it is to the students. So is it something that's going to move them forward? Or is it just going to frustrate them and they're not going to take it anywhere or get any further with their work? The other thing that impacts faculty, and we've probably all had these conversations, how do I get an A? It's not always about the learning path that happens, it's about the grade at the end of it, and how do I get that A so that I can get whatever piece I want to go on to do next, so a master's degree if I'm an undergrad student. So it's that focus on the grades, not on the feedback. So that's another consideration that you have as your faculty member, and then fairness. And that's when you're marking a batch of papers, and one of the things I always do is I mark the entire batch and then I go back to the beginning, because oftentimes I find the first 2 or 3 papers I've marked are different from the last 3 papers I've marked, so I have to go back and make sure it's consistent throughout. Because I learn as I'm going through, and I've taught the same course for about 7 years now, and I still find at the beginning I forget some of the things I want to mention. By the time I got to the end, I've remembered them and found them and explored them as I'm going through with other students, so then I go back to the beginning and start all over again, which is time consuming, but it creates a fairness throughout student structure so they can see the same thing, or not the same comment, but similar approaches on each of their classmates' assignments. So the other piece for faculty is the volume, and this was mentioned in one of the posts to Padlet. The class size has a great impact on how you can physically get through marking all the papers that you have to mark and provide in-depth feedback. And related to that is that student to faculty ratio. So if you're co-teaching a course, you may parcel up you mark activity 1, I'll mark activity 2, so you're balancing your time in different ways. And communication intensive classes, so that means when you're asking students to post things in, so you've got wikis, you've got tweets, you've got blogs, you've got your papers, you've got team assignments, and there are lots of discussions going on within the Moodle discussion formats. That all has an impact on how much time you can devote to providing feedback. So those are another of the challenges that we have. And then there was one more slide for faculty, and that was how does it make us feel stressed? And I don't know if anybody else feels stressed when they're marking. It's usually the thing I tend to procrastinate over and find something I really have to talk to somebody about something when I have a stack of assignments that I really should be marking. So it's that stress that it creates, and projecting forward to how the student's going to feel when they receive the feedback. So that's one of the pieces that can be inhibitive sometimes to providing effective feedback. The time-consuming piece we have already mentioned, and these researchers found that faculty put this down as being the least rewarding of teaching activities, because you're not working with the student at that time. They're at a distance, you're doing your marking, and you come back and regroup to talk to them later. So I'm now going to hand it over to Teresa, who's going to talk about the students.
Hello. There we go. Okay, for the online folks, what I just said was I remembered to come over here, but I forgot to turn on my mic. I'll get it all one of these times. So thinking about the student perspective, probably the first one isn't going to be surprising, right? I think most of us tend to feel emotionally vulnerable when we're receiving feedback, particularly when it's on something that we've put so much of ourselves into, right? And writing is inherently a very personal act. The two that follow were bits of information and suggestions that I hadn't really thought of, but that I found really interesting, which is the second bullet really speaks to the idea of language socialization and feedback language socialization in particular. So, students growing up in Canada might be accustomed to the kind of language that teachers in Canada tend to use to give feedback. Students from other places might not be used to that language, right? So, for example, if somebody writes good, next to a paragraph, what does that mean, right? Or an X or a check mark, what does that mean? So there can sometimes be just those disconnections around what that language is actually referring to and what students are supposed to do with it. You know, for that matter, that socialization could happen just between teachers, even within the same school system, or, you know, there's lots of different ways of doing these things. And then I think the third point is, you know, that view to moving forward, right? So, okay, you've told me that I have this error in my work, what am I supposed to do with it? Because if they knew what that error was, they probably wouldn't have made it. Right? So really making sure that they have that information in order to know how to move forward, so that, again, it's building that confidence and awareness of themselves as writers and knowing where they can go and how they can approach improving. Any questions about any of these? Make sense so far? Okay. In terms of what students want from feedback, I think you've actually hit on a lot of this already, which is fantastic. So, you know, looking beyond the immediacy of that assignment, how can I get better as a writer, right? So, looking down the line, what do I need to do? And, you know, the idea of this specific, timely, and constructive feedback that identifies the strengths and challenges in the work. I really liked the point that was raised, I think it was in the Padlet, around focusing on the work, not focusing on the writer. Right? Because often when people are receiving feedback, it can feel like it's a very personal criticism, when in fact it's a critique of the work, right? And so trying to help students feel the difference between those things, so that hopefully they can have a little bit of distance between them. And then this idea of, you know, providing explanations and giving information on how to improve, so that it's really enabling the students and giving them a pathway. So in terms then of looking at what does this red light, yellow light, green light structure mean, right? When we're talking about a red light feedback comment, really that's something that just kind of stops a student in his or her tracks, right? Either because of the emotional impact, a lack of information, but it doesn't help the student move forward. My personal connection to this is, I remember when I was at grad school, I received an essay back from an instructor where the feedback was so, I'm going to be generous and say not helpful, that I read maybe the first 2 pages and I chucked it across the room because I was so angry, and I never looked at it again. Well, so that was a big waste of time for that instructor, right? I got nothing out of it. So where's the learning there, right? So kind of an extreme example that I'm not entirely proud of, of a reaction, but you know, that's obviously not going to help anyone move forward if that's the kind of response that students are having. So in terms of, let me come back to this. So if I'm giving you an example of red light feedback, right? Something like, you don't make sense here, right? Is going to be very personal for a student, because the student thought they made sense. But if you're saying you don't make sense here, that's not, I'm struggling to understand this sentence. It's, you didn't make sense. It's pretty hard not to take that personally, right? Or something like wrong. What do you do with wrong, right? So trying to give students more information, more clarity around what exactly it is that's being addressed, so that they know how to address that and how to move forward. So then we get into yellow light feedback, right? Proceed with caution, which is kind of like, okay, I've got some information, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. So that's where I'd put something like good, right? Or APA issues here, but they're not actually identified. So then the student doesn't really know what those APA issues are. So it makes it harder. I can see some skepticism over here. So look it up, right? But if this is a brand new student who's just learning APA, right, and really has no idea, even just the extra clarity of APA citation issue here, or problem with citing whatever, right? But fair point, I understand what you're saying, okay? So obviously, can't apply this to all situations in all ways, but just really thinking about how that feedback can be provided in a way that it provides useful information and a way forward, right? Rather than the student kind of going, oh, okay, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with this. And then green light feedback is kind of that combination of, you know, clear, specific, constructive, all of those things that you all brought up in that first exercise of, what does the student need in order to know exactly what to do next time? Okay, and that gives the student a clear path ahead. That makes sense? Any comments or questions? Any arguments? Okay. Yes. Oh, thank you for remembering that. Just takes a couple
One
seconds.
of the
There you go.
things when I see this is the challenge I particularly face with year 2 students where English as a second language becomes a challenge as well. And I tend to maybe sometimes fall into the yellow because I do want them to go and search for the support that
Absolutely.
the English Language Center can provide to them, right? Basic sentence structure, items that would, and so maybe that clarity and specific, my moving forward is, you should definitely book an appointment, I'm referring you. But I don't go in it deeper. Is that considered yellow?
I think what you've done there is a really nice example of looking at how you could move it into green, right? Is saying you have some sentence structure issues here. Either can you point them to where there's an issue or a resource online, or if it's something where you want to refer to them to the ELC for them to get that one-on-one support, either say, please go talk to somebody, right? Or something like that where you're giving them information as to what to do about that, so that it's not just having them stuck at sentence structure issues. I think I absolutely understand what you're saying in terms of wanting to encourage them to go look for what information is there, but I think pointing them in a direction of how they can do that can be really helpful. Yeah, kind of in between, but you're going in the right direction. Okay, and I'm going to hand this over to Joe now.
I'm just going to revisit that last slide. Thank you. Excuse me. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the second activity is talking about the last slide, so things that you can think of that are examples of red and yellow light feedback that you've provided or have been provided to you. And then we have another activity that builds on those. So if you're online, if you scroll over, you'll see that question has been posted to the right side of the screen. Scroll down, there we go. So if you're online, if you could just add some examples. Teresa mentioned a few. Think about some more things that you may have used. And also, I would challenge you to think about times when it might be good to use those red and yellow light feedback. So what were the examples that you came up with on your tables? And you've each got the mics on your tables. There's a couple of things we have up here. So if you what question mark isn't very helpful because you're not actually having that dialogue at this point with the student. You're not in the same room as them. You're asking a question that they're getting, but they don't know how to respond to the question because they don't know where you're coming from. Or which is very casual language in the first place when you're writing an assignment. So that's one. And then how do you say, I don't understand what you're trying to say without hurting their feelings? It's a good question. We'll talk about that. So what did you come up with? Red light, yellow light.
So I put forward an example which was about a statement which was invalid that the student had made at a kind of a critical point in the paper. And so we were discussing at the table, the seriousness of certain situations. So basically, it broke the back of the paper at that point. And so we were talking about the seriousness of how you say this is an invalid statement and this is, kind of undermines your entire argument, essentially. So, and Jean said I was okay. So.
Jean just had a nice way of saying it.
So what was it?
Well, I think that the seriousness of the matter was important, and to just qualify, I think what you were trying to say was that the evidence that they provided and the claim they were making, they couldn't make the claim based on the evidence provided, and therefore it undermined the paper. And I think that that's very valid feedback, and it is pretty serious in terms of the paper and its consequence. So the question would be, did you use the you, like you screwed up, versus this is an error, and here's the consequence of what it means for the integrity of the argument in this paper. So I think it's a matter of language. I didn't find the way you described it as being red light.
I think the you and the this is, I think, is an important distinction in kind of
Yes.
framing those kinds of heavy comments.
Exactly. So were there other comments that you came up with that were red or yellow, that kind of borderline? And did you have answered the second part of the question, which was, is it okay to use red and yellow at some points and not at others?
I'll just give my example of the red
do.
language, which I used to use and don't anymore, which was at the master's level, you are expected. And so it has such a kind of passive aggressive kind of tone to it that it is red light for folks, although I thought it was very justified at the time.
Yeah.
But I don't do it anymore
Good example.
because I went to this workshop with Jo already.
Yes. She knows all the answers. She was here before. So were there any other things you wanted to bring forward about the red? Okay, so what we'll do, can we flip it back to the PowerPoint? And I believe it's yours.
It is mine. Okay. My microphone
keep it.
is on, and I'm coming to the stage.
But I'm keeping this.
But you're, oh. I was so close to having it all. So, I think when you're thinking about Greenlight feedback, and, a lot of this has already come out in the conversation we've had so far, right? But again, it's thinking about that constructive critique versus a personal criticism. And I really like this idea of, the evidence didn't support the claim, not you've done a terrible job here, right? Like there's a big difference there. The thing that I try and focus on when I'm giving feedback on writing is particularly actually the latter part of that first bullet point, which is that it explains the experience of reading the work. So one of the ways that I approach the kind of thing that Jeff was talking about, and there was also a question on the Padlet around how do you nicely say to somebody this doesn't make sense, is to put it in my experience. As I read this sentence, I struggled to understand how these ideas were linking together, or I struggled to understand how this idea connects to the bigger idea of this paragraph. Is there a way that you could connect this more directly so as a reader, I have an easier time of understanding how you're bringing these ideas together? So that it's me, it's I, right? It's not the author sort of projecting it, it's I struggled. Which I think can help to diffuse kind of that reaction to it by helping the student to think about what the reader's experience was in reading that article or reading that text, right? So that explanation of the experience, I think, can be a little more neutral than what can sound like the grading voice, but rather it's just, this was my experience as a reader. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Giving information that helps students to think critically about their works, right? That's kind of what we're trying to do. So one of the ways that I think can attach to that is asking questions, right? So how does this idea connect to this idea? How does this information connect to the larger claim of, so that you're not always in the role of having to provide all the answers, but actually you're asking students questions that they can then go think about their own writing. Right? And that helps that development of critical thinking skills. We've already talked about providing specific information, so I'll leave that for now. But this final point about encouraging students to think of themselves as writers in development, I think often writing feels like it's something that, well, I've written a paper and so now I'm a writer, I'm done. Right? And it never is. Writing is always an ongoing process of skill building. So if it can be approached through that kind of that identification of, okay, so here's a skill for you to work on that will help you with this skill, and so it's that working toward that goal rather than, well, one person's a writer and another person isn't, right? Then it helps with that development and that confidence.
This is me.
Okay. I will get off the stage.
Many of these things. Do you have questions? Okay, many of these things we've talked about again, so I think we'll speed quickly through this. So just develop that confidence in the writing. That's what we're trying to do this particular Greenlight feedback. And it just gives you time for marking the content. And if you think about the way that we're doing it, you're front-loading it. So you can then delve deeper into the content as you're going down. It saves time marking because we'll show you some of the things that we've done. Teresa's done a huge amount of work that will actually save you some time marking. And then this focus on marking the content I just mentioned, and encourages students to use the Writing Center. That's one of the things I try to lead them in that direction. So when you don't like what they're writing, there are so many resources in the Writing Center that will specifically point them to that particular thing that you have a problem with in that sentence or paragraph. Point them in that direction. And then it's the ease of accessing the resources, because many of the students, we give them the spiel about the Writing Center and the library and the student services and all those things at the beginning when they come into residencies or they're in our orientation sessions prior to starting the course, but they forget there's so much information that they're getting. So it's reminding them to go back to the resources we have and how easy it is for them to watch. Some of them are videos to watch, some of them are PowerPoints, etc. So it's just that reminding them. And then this slide is just a few examples of what I call the Greenlight feeding that I have done. And I pulled out some of the assignments that I was marking as we were going through the PowerPoint. And I noticed that at the beginning, I was saying please. And as I started getting through the paper, I stopped saying please. So that's just, so please make sure your formatting is consistent with APA and look at the writing guide. Like, here's where you can go to find it. Not just saying fix your APA, but make sure your formatting is consistent, and here's where you need to go to look for it. And then review Writing Center resources on writing academic paragraph. That's one of my very favorite all-time quote. Almost every student will get that at some point in their writing. Like, remind yourselves how to write an academic paragraph and make a good argument. And then, use past tense. And then all of those are linked straight through to the Writing Center resources, so you can just zoom straight in and go to those things and check the following resources for paragraphing versus using direct quotes. So I'm telling them what it is I have a problem with. It'll usually be overuse of direct quotes. You'll find a student whose paper is direct quotes throughout, and it really interrupts the flow of their work. I don't know whose voice is being used. It's very difficult to read. So I usually say, minimize those, and here's how you can do these things. Here's some resources that will help you. And so then we go to the activity 3, which we only probably have a couple of minutes for. So maybe we'll just do this as a quick go around. So thinking of some of the things that you brought up. So Jeff had mentioned some of the things that you had struggles with around what you were saying with things, and then Jean had mentioned some solutions to the things. So are there any other things that we've come across or talked about that you think might be problematic, and ways that you can switch it into a positive way of moving the student forward into that empowerment?
Yeah, to time it. So just thinking for myself,
Okay, go ahead.
I've started thinking about this a lot more recently because I've just finished 9 courses over 2.5 years. And the feedback for the deliverables is received within 5 days of the submission. That includes weekends. That's just their rule. It's like 5 days. Sometimes it's faster than that. The longest I've had to wait is 5 days. But there's something about that immediacy because your head's in it. Mm-hmm. You've just submitted it. You get the feedback and you remember. And I think that's just something that is a consideration.
And sometimes it's trying to weigh the quality, the depth of the feedback with the speed of the feedback. Yes. And the number of students in the classes. There must be a mathematical formula that we should come up with.
We should come up with one.
Yes, that'd be a good research project. So all those considerations have to come in, but that timeline piece is, you're right. So are there any other things? Otherwise, I think I'm going to keep on moving because we want to get to the actual show and tell of the Writing Center. So some of the results that we found from doing this, so I've switched how I mark things, and these are the things that I found was happening when I was doing it. So I was directing them to them, which allowed them to not only understand the Writing Center is there, but know that that's what I was going to do. So I have one assignment, and these are the feedback you're going to get. I'm going to point you in the direction there anyway. But I also give them weekly bulletins, and in the bulletins I give them writing tips that come right out of the Writing Center, quote, cite the Writing Center as the source, and the students are given these little, anything to do with sentence structure or anything, millions of things in the Writing Center. Go and have a look over that, it's fantastic. And then more efficient marking processes, so I keep my own capture comments, and I hate doing cut and paste, but there are times when cut and paste really does work and saves time. So I have those ones that I know frequently come up plonk them in, and it does save time to do that. It doesn't mean I'm not personalising the feedback in other ways. I am. It's just certain comments I repeat over and over again. There's no point reconstructing them. Improves the feedback because they're getting feedback directly on their writing, and they're also getting feedback directly on the content of their work, and they're getting moved in a forward direction, so they've got resources that they can go to. And then I do get fewer repeat problems. So once I've gone through this the first round, some will not look at the feedback, but many of the students do look at it and try and learn. So it really does make a difference. And, oops.
Whoops. There we go. Hang on.
Who's controlling this?
Not me.
It's got a life of its own. So now you're...
Yes. So kind of keeping an eye on time, I can either briefly describe to you what these are, or I can actually show you some of them.
Pull them up.
What would you like to see some of them?
I'd pull them up, I think.
Okay.
Because we can give them the resources at the end anyway.
Okay, so this is the Writing Center website. I just wanted to show you the navigation so you know how to get here. At the bottom of this list of pages on the website, there's instructor resources. And within this, I have frequently accessed resources and resources on giving feedback on student writing. So if you're looking for the sorts of resources that you might likely be pointing students to, there's a whole list of them here. And what I will also say is, if you're ever wanting to know if there's a resource on a particular topic, please feel free to get in touch with us and ask. Right? We're always happy to direct people to information. It's also really helpful for us to know what you'd like to see. So if there's something that is coming up often in student writing and we don't have a resource on it, that's good feedback for us so that we can try and develop something fairly quickly. So please have a look through these when you have time, and if you have any questions about them, let me know. In terms of the giving feedback section, the video or the lunchtime session that Joe and I did last year that kind of built into this is available here, and I imagine we'll also be posting this video in this section too so that people can find it. I have a help guide here to giving feedback on student writing that I should have popped open and didn't, so I apologize for that, but I will very quickly open it up. And what I've tried to do with this is to give people a starting point for when they're giving feedback. So this really gives you a jumping off point that you can then personalize that feedback so that you can turn it into that Greenlight feedback. But you can see it covers a lot of different writing issues. And what I've done is I've identified what the issue is, the rule that relates to it, correct and incorrect examples, a sample feedback comment that you could then personalize and build on, as well as a link to where you could point the student to find more information. So in terms of kind of building that specific, concrete, gives them the direction forward, all of that. I'm hopeful that that will be helpful to you in that. And then there's just some other resources here. This resource, the Commenting on Student Writing, actually has a curriculum piece in it. So if you're looking at kind of course design and how can you stage assignments such that you're giving students opportunity to get feedback, that resource might provide some information. Looking at a process for giving feedback, this is a resource that I've put together that kind of reflects how we do that in the Writing Center. And then just some guiding questions on writing. So coming back to what I was saying before about using questions rather than kind of being directive if you're trying to encourage people to be thinking about their writing, I've tried to give some example questions here of where you might want to start in doing that. And I've done that for lots of different aspects of writing. So I hope that will be helpful too. The last thing that I'm going to show very quickly is that we have a tool called Write Answers. If you haven't tried this out yet, please do. You can get to this from the Writing Center's homepage. Anytime you see a blue Ask Us button on the Writing Center pages, it will get you to this right here. And you can search for by keyword here. We have a lot of APA related information here. So if you're just wanting to find a link to send a student to, please look into personal communication. You could search for personal communication here, find a link, and then you've got that for them. But we've also used this for navigation of the Writing Center's resources. So if there's something in particular you're looking for and you want to know if we have a resource on it, you could certainly use this tool as well to help you with that. The last thing that I'm going to show you is the writing tips page. Every month I publish a writing tip in Crossroads for the Royal Roads community, and I archive them here so that people can come back and easily find them. You can see I've sort of organized them into 5 different columns, but you know, if there's something in particular that you're looking for, this is another good place to go in order to just see what's here. I am always so grateful for suggestions of writing tips. So if there's something you're interested in and you don't see it here, please feel free to email me and let me know what it is that you're thinking about, because as I said, I'm always glad to get those suggestions. So that's just a very brief tour of some of the resources, but I'm always so pleased to speak with faculty to find out what they're looking for and are there things that I can develop in order to help with that. So please don't ever hesitate to get in touch and let me know what it is that you'd like. Sure.
This is the page that I usually do.
Mike,
So
your mic.
Mike's, sorry. This is the page that I call for variety of reasons. So if I'm going through marking assignments and I find that there's been really verbose students and they're just rambling on, then I'll look for something on concise writing and I'll post that and I'll just say a little bit about, you know, hey, these are one of the things you could consider as you're going forward. In general terms, this is something that could help you all. So each week I'll give them something. And I've heard students really enjoy, they like that part of the thing, because it's not just telling them your assignment's due, you've this and that and the other. It's, hey, look, there's something you can learn in this week of the bulletin. And it's great because it has so many different things on that page right there. And they're short, they're usually fairly short examples and tips and ways of changing things and what to do. So I bookmark that page, it's a good one.
Okay.
Go.
You probably don't want to spend a lot of time reading the references, but we'll make it available for people.
Yes, there it is. Correctly formatted.
Correctly formatted,
This
thank you very
time.
much.
It wasn't, it was my fault last time, honestly. It was. So, any questions remaining long? Okay. If anybody wants the resources, let us know. Thank you.
Thanks very much.